and welcome to another episode of Your Right to Know, brought to you by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. I'll be your co-host this evening. My name is Andrew Couture, and with me, as always, is my friend and co-host, Mary Lotze. How you doing, Mary?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. And today is part 2 of our discussion of the HD 4420 titled An Act Modernizing Firearms Law. And joining us again is Tom Swenson. Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So just to reintroduce yourself to our viewing audience, why don't you just tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself as we continue.
Sure. I'm Tom Swenson. I am a licensed firearms owner here in Fitchburg, and I am also an advocate for the Second Amendment.
Okay, so this is part 2 of last month's show, where again we're talking about the new bill 4420. If you're viewing this, you really need to go to last month's show to get the complete show and the discussions there. But some of the discussions will probably be a little similar, but we're going to continue on with our conversation. So just to keep everybody informed, 4420 is currently sitting in the House right now, and because the legislation is off for August break, nothing has really been done on it, but this show is going to be broadcasted in September, so we will be hearing about this again once the legislators come back into session. So, Tom, getting back into our discussion, do you believe that the majority of the citizens out there understand and appreciate the full ramifications of the proposed law, and that will, in essence, restrict ownership as well as sales of firearms in Massachusetts?
The word is getting out, I think, to what we would call the 2A community, members of sportsmen's clubs, certainly members of Gun Owners Action League, and anyone that follows the debates around the right to keep and bear arms. It has certainly gotten out. As far as the public at large, I don't believe so.
Now, the proposed legislation, which I've reviewed, let's just say it's as clear as mud. And do you believe that the proposed law and even the current law are overarching, technically written as to confuse the average gun owner?
Oh, they absolutely are. Massachusetts gun law, as it stands right now, is a mess.
In fact, I tell my students and my clients all the time is that gun laws are written so the average person can't open up a book and go, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's written to confuse the average person, unless, of course, they have a law degree or something like that, to be able to find out exactly what they need to do.
Isn't that entrapment? I mean, basically, isn't that the definition of legal entrapment? When you write so-called laws that are so complex and so confusing that people don't understand what the rules are, so that you always have that opportunity to bag them for it.
Well, that's exactly what they do in Massachusetts. Prior to starting the show, I was telling you a story about a gentleman. He moved to Georgia for a brief period of time to take care of his grandfather's estate. While in Georgia, he became a Georgia resident. After 6 months, he became a resident in that state. And so while he was there, he purchased some firearms, which in Georgia, you don't have a licensing requirement. You don't have any restrictions on what kind of guns you can purchase like we have up here in Massachusetts. So while he was there, he purchased some firearms, which you wouldn't be able to bring into Massachusetts. So after the estate was settled, he was planning to move back up to Massachusetts. He took the firearms that he couldn't bring, put them into a safe, which there is no storage requirement in Georgia, and put that safe into a storage bin, locked the storage bin, and he moved back to Massachusetts. About a year later, he gets a call from the Georgia police saying, hey, your storage facility was broken into, and somebody pried open the safe and took the guns. And so, being a good citizen that he is, and under the law, if you have a firearm stolen from you, you have to report it to the police. and the police automatically revoked his license when he was a victim of a crime. So Massachusetts is already under the assumption that if you can take away a citizen's gun rights, do so for any reason
For any
whatsoever.
reason.
So yes, you're 100% right. These laws are made to entrap the average gun owner who, if they don't know the law, they could get in trouble, quickly. A lot of times you see improper storage charges all the time because people don't know what's the proper way to store a firearm, and it is definitely made to entrap. Tom, what do you think?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
And in the entrapment, excuse me, I know you're ready to ask another question, but in the entrapment, what you find is that the average citizen who is now entrapped has to hire an attorney and pay tens of thousands of dollars to defend themselves for a constitutional right. And I look at this as, I'm not at the same level of, we'll say, gun ownership and all as you are. I have a gun license, but constitutionally, I think this is my biggest concern. Is I worry about we use the term slippery slope. You asked if you thought the citizenry. We know the gun owners are concerned about it, and gun rights people and things like that, are hunters and all are concerned about this bill. But people don't realize this is another attack on our constitutional rights. So if you as an average citizen aren't concerned about it, you're putting your head in the sand, because little by little all our rights are being taken away from us.
Yeah, and this bill, HD 4420, I mean, it's a virtual minefield for gun owners. It really is.
Can you explain to our viewing audience, like, just one or two specific requirements in this new proposed law that could trip up an otherwise lawful firearms owner?
Sure. You've got, a couple of friends, they're on their way to a gun range to go shooting for an afternoon, and they pull into a Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, and they got their guns locked in a case in the back of the car, and they go through Dunkin' Donuts. They've now violated the law. They're committing a felony because they have egressed onto private property without the specific, with their firearms, without the specific written permission of the property owner.
Which would be Dunkin' Donuts
or some franchisee or someplace. They wouldn't even know who to contact if they even were trying, even if they were aware of it and were trying to comply with this law, or just to get a cup of coffee, things like that. For example, with the expanded gun bans under the so-called assault weapons definition, which they are now redefining, there is no grandfather provision in this bill. So that what happens is the instant that the governor signs this thing, they are now felons because they're in possession of these banned so-called assault weapons.
that
And basically
became banned in one
immediately,
signature,
like
one
overnight.
afternoon.
Yeah, overnight.
It's like as soon as that signature's on the paper,
Yeah.
you're a felon.
And that was an arbitrary decision that was made by, at that time, Attorney General Maura Healey.
Correct. Now, Maura Healey, when she proposed her gun ban, the federal government put together a federal gun ban. And that was started in 1994. And it had a 10-year sunset provision. Okay, so basically 10 years you can't buy certain guns. And those guns were like the AR, AK-47, Uzis, Galils, MAC-10s, things that have scary names but are just, technically just a rifle. So they called those the enumerated weapons. And those are the weapons that are specifically designated in the law. You can't have these. And then what Maura Healey did is she went even further and said, well, you can't have any copies or duplicates of these guns. And what the copies and duplicates are, so you could not have a Colt AR-15. That was one of the enumerated weapons. And then what she did is, like, if you could take a part from an enumerated weapon and put it into another weapon, that new weapon is now considered an assault weapon. So it might not be a Colt AR-15, it could be a Smith & Wesson 15, which is, you know, similar. If you could take one of those parts and put it into another gun, that other gun now would be an assault weapon. Now the loophole is, and what they're doing is they're trying to close the loophole, is that these enumerated weapons were limited. So now what they want to do is basically take any semi-automatic rifle and make those illegal. And those are, they're basically just typical rifles that you see. Any semi-automatic is now banned.
You know, one of the things that, Tom, also to add to we'll say the drive-through thing. So as a woman and worried about young girls, in my own family, at one time with my LTC, I did buy mace and gave it to my granddaughter and a niece who were starting college. I thought on a college campus with all of the reports of, you know, who knows what gangs, parties, I don't know. I wanted them to feel safe and carry it in their purse. So I gave them each one. Now, I know that was probably against the law, technically, because they didn't have LTCs, but I had LTCs. Now, after many college campus reports and things like that came out a few years later, I think you said it was the Supreme Court?
No, it was the SJC that came down with a decision that took the requirement to at least have your FID card, because you at least needed that prior to this decision in order to get mace. All right, now, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts said that's no longer a requirement.
It's a good self-defense mechanism, and people should have it.
Mm-hmm.
Now this law again puts that on requirement, and anyone under 18 found carrying mace for self-defense purposes is a felon.
Well, see, that's why I think that this law, even if it is passed, is going to be challenged quickly, both on the state level, for the exact same reason. The SJC already said that you don't need an FID card in order to carry mace. So basically, the legislation that's proposed is flying in the face of not only the Bruin decision, but also that decision in regards to mace. Because basically the legislators are saying, we don't like what the court's decision was, so we're going to enact another law in order to be able to say, no, you need this.
Yeah, and as another example too, I mean, arms are anything. They're any implement that you can use for self-defense. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example that from the Supreme Court. It was Massachusetts versus Catano. Had to do with stun guns. And Massachusetts had banned stun guns, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's an arm. Mm-hmm. And ruled that people have the right to have a stun gun.
Mm-hmm. Now, what Massachusetts did in regards to the stun gun was they, you're required now to have an LTC and to treat that stun gun like it's like it's a gun. You know, it needs to be locked up. You know, you have to register it in order to purchase it. And when they first started selling these, they were like, how the heck are we going to register these stun guns? You know, they had no proper paperwork, mm-hmm. and they were using the same forms that if you would purchase a gun in order to purchase a stun gun. And it was a mess. It was a mess both under the FFLs, and it was a mess federally. And FFL is a federal firearms license dealer. And it was a mess federally because they were trying to report it under federally and wasn't working. And under the state, they kept getting all of these forms for guns, and it was just for stun guns. So now the state actually came out with a new form to say, okay, when you purchase a stun gun, this is how you register it. So that became a mess too. So so also when it comes to some of the more confusing bits of this law, you also have additional requirements just to get your firearms license. You know, now you have to have a shooting requirement. Is that a requirement now under this law?
Live fire, yes.
Live fire training.
Yep, and in fact, they're even including active shooter training. Okay? Now, first of all, if they're keeping you from carrying anywhere, right, what good is the active shooter training going to do?
Active
For you.
shooter, is that
That's like
sort of simulation of
Correct.
being in
Right.
a street fight?
No, kind of like what happened just recently this past week in Pittsburgh, I believe it was. There was an active shooter, and he was basically, he had a firearm, and he was just shooting random civilians. And you would have to go through the training to be able to combat that situation, but you're not given the ability to carry the firearm in order to combat
Well,
that situation.
so if you're in a mall, what are you supposed to do with an active shooter? Throw a snow cone at him? I mean, realistically,
Run
a
like
Starbucks.
hell, basically.
Because this law, this new law, if enacted, actually prohibits policemen off duty from carrying a firearm. And that
Yeah.
was always known as almost a safeguard if you just had
At one
your
point, it was
local
a
policeman
yeah.
going,
At one point, it was a requirement.
walking down the street or in a mall or whatever. That was always considered safe.
So I mean, you have the same. You can get the same training that the police get. You know, all you have to do is go up to the 6 Hour Academy, and you're standing shoulder to shoulder with police, some military personnel, and you can just pay for the same training that they get. So I mean, if you're really into it and you want to become, you know, as safe as a police officer, and trust me, with some of the stories that I've seen with, you know, police officers on the dance floor losing their gun,
I know. the
you know,
men's
police
room,
officers having accidental discharge. And did you ever find it funny that if a police officer has an accidental discharge, it's just that, an accidental discharge.
Right.
It was a common folk like you and I, it's a negligent discharge.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
So-
it's grounds for revocation too, isn't it?
It is. It's grounds for revocation, but not if you're a police officer.
Yeah.
So those are some of the nuances that, you know,
Which is then
in current Massachusetts law.
Probably one of the reasons that they rolled it in, because of that they don't want policemen off duty on dance floors, even having firearms.
Yeah, it's
So do you believe that the proposed legislation is an opening salvo to take other rights away under the Constitution?
You know, my feeling is the open salvo was fired decades ago, and it's just been a gradual tightening of the noose, just becoming more and more and more restrictive.
They're trying to take our
in my
First
view,
Amendment right
this
away.
is not the opening salvo. This is the coup de grace for gun rights in the Commonwealth. If this law was to pass and it was to be upheld, which I don't think it will be, but. And then, you know, I think we're going to see the same tactic used on our other rights.
Well, they're already, you know, trying to restrict our First Amendment right. You know, just look at what happened in 2020 with, you know, Twitter censoring news articles about, you know, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, and, you know, so that's come to the forefront, and it's no longer.
And that was a political mess, and it was done on purpose.
Of course it was.
To sway an election.
Of course it was.
Keep
Absolutely was.
vital information away from the public who would go to vote.
But now it's in the forefront. We've proven that this was true, and information has come out that yes, you know, they did do this. Both Facebook, Twitter, and all the social medias, they were contacted by the federal government saying, hey, you might hear a story or two about Hunter's laptop and, you know, conversations that Joe might have had with some of Hunter Biden's you know, business partners. You know, you might
the
want to.
Ukraine and-
That's all Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
You know, don't allow that to get distributed amongst the masses. So there goes our first, you know, a step in, you know, against our
Well,
First Amendment right.
You know, I look at the First Amendment, I look at all of our amendment rights, all of our constitutional rights, I should say, when we lived through COVID and we saw what happened with COVID. And just, again, almost like in the blink of an eye, what was supposed to be a lockdown for 2 weeks ended up in 2+ years,
Yeah.
where people couldn't go to
Right.
work, kids couldn't go to school, people had to wear masks 24/7, people couldn't congregate in their own families to celebrate holidays or
Funerals?
occasions, funerals.
I mean, you know, you lose a loved one and you can't have a funeral.
Well, they're talk about them doing it again. Of course, here we go. One about a year until the next federal election.
And they're
Yeah,
hauling
just in
out,
time.
And they're talking
they're hauling
about
out, slow rolling in all of the same
mask requirements,
They'll have
distancing
again, mail-in
requirements.
voting.
So they're doing it again. Why? Well, because no matter how much they want to indict Trump, his poll numbers keep growing and growing and growing. In fact, every time they indict him,
his numbers go up.
his numbers go up yet again. And of course, we're recording this. It's the day after the presidential debate where Trump wasn't present, the first presidential debate, and it almost seemed like it was the first vice presidential debate.
Well, I believe that most of these debates are really to sort out who's going to be in the cabinet or who's going to be the vice president.
Well, that's what it appeared to me. But anyways, going back to the issues that we're here for today, we're kind of getting off track. So every time you hear about a heinous shooting, mass shooting, or otherwise, I know I cringe. I'm sure you do. Not only for the violent act and the horror that was caused, but also because you know that there will be the weapon, and it would be the weapon and not the criminal element that will be blamed. So how can this rush to find fault with all who support the Second Amendment be reinforced?
I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we didn't see this kind of thing when I was growing up, especially in schools when I was a kid. And, a lot of my friends had access to firearms. I go over some kid's house and, they'd be a 22, a 30-30, and a 20 gauge on the rack above the kid's bed. And none of this stuff happened. So, so what has changed here? And there's two things I see. The first thing I think is mental health. That's a big, untreated, unrecognized. Why do we have so many psychotic young people that are resorting to this kind of violence? The only thing I can think of is I wonder if there's something going on with some of the medications these kids are on.
Well, I mean, you talk about the 60s and 70s, and I will even go into the 80s, when I was young. There was no such thing as ADHD. There was no such thing. It was unknown. It was undiagnosed, and then they started diagnosing it and putting the kids on medicine. And as soon as these kids developed into young adulthood, you look at what was the first mass shooting that that in recent memory, like the first one, Columbine.
Yes.
When did they start really prescribing medication to these kids? Late 80s, early 90s.
That was 1999. It would have given that child.
And then it gave that child
16, 17 years
of being fully medicated to control whatever issue that child had, and then it was a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. And there's one other factor I see, and is fatherlessness.
Oh.
So many of these young people are growing up in fatherless homes. Either the father's not present or not engaged. And I know we've seen it with several of these mass shootings.
I think it's also just the society and the depraved heart of society as well. Like, people just don't think about their fellow man anymore. It's all about me. It's about
video
me.
games where they're so violent, gratuitous,
well,
shoot 'em up.
We had violent video games in the 80s. I played video games like that when I was growing up. I'm not going out shooting anybody. I think could it be a combination? People back then used to say, oh, the movies are making kids violent. Well, they stopped making as violent movies I'm talking like RoboCop, Terminator, things like that. We saw those movies. We didn't go out and act on it. So I don't think the movies or the media really play a part in that. Back in the day, they were saying the music was causing kids.
Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore.
Tipper Gore. This the extreme music that people are listening to. That didn't start. That didn't start the
It's a
mass
confluence
shootings.
of all the media, the total of media. I mean, I really think, and I don't want to say fatherlessness being the man as the father. I think a two-parent household, a two-parent that loves the children and is there for the children. I think we don't have that commitment to the children now in many cases. I think, you know, because of drugs and everything else, life is so freewheeling that the children are oftentimes cast to the side to bring up themselves.
I also think discipline has gone out the window. You know, when I was growing up, you know, discipline was a thing. You know, if I talk back to my parents, you know, I definitely hear about it and feel it too.
Yeah.
You don't see that nowadays. Now kids go into timeout. Okay, your time, you know, all right, timeout, 5 minutes in your room.
Yeah.
Oh, great. So what are they going to do? They're going to go play video games.
And they go on the phone.
Or they go on the phone, or, you know,
everyone.
so, you know, the discipline isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it too. Yeah. You know, it's not your job to be your child's friend. It's your job to be their parent.
To end, because our show is wrapping up, believe it or not, all of a sudden. But I think Speaker of the House Mariano, who really wanted to push this bill through and get it passed into law and fast track it over the 4th of July weekend, and that didn't happen. Thankfully, it's been put into House because of Speaker Spilka and others. But I think one of the things that's frightening is, according to some of the research that I've done, is he wants this into law, and he wants this to be sort of a prototype for a gun safety law throughout the United States.
A gunless society is more like
a gunless society.
Yeah. Total civilian disarmament is what they're after.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining
thank you.
us and
thanks for having me.
And being with us tonight. And this topic obviously is not going to go away, because as September rolls in, this is only going to hit the presses even more. We've got several Second Amendment rallies to go to. I've got one that I'm going to. I'm sure you two have more than one that you're going to. But we thank you for watching Your Right to Know and sitting in with the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. And we want you to remember that your city or town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your liberty, your constitutional rights, and your conservative values. We encourage you to join us. Why? Because to us, the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity for all people, and because we always stand for your freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom, so let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and